Max Weisbrod here, founder of Baton, and I am joined today by Clay Simmons, founder of the KD McAlly Group, a customer success enablement consultancy, and also the founder of the Fractional Leadership LinkedIn group. Clay, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, hi Max. Great to be here. Yeah, so Clay Simmons here, based in Austin, Texas. I am the founder of KD McAlly Group, as Max had mentioned. We help companies of all different sizes help grow and scale their customer success functions, enabling a tighter coupling of the customer success team with the sales, marketing, and product teams, improving overall revenue growth, retention, and ultimately customer delight. Glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation we're having here on fractional leadership.
Awesome. So, when we think about customer success, especially in a downturn, when the sales cycle is starting to extend and it's harder to get into those new clients, defending and expanding your existing revenue and client base becomes really critical. What pain points do founders and leaders have when they come to you? What drives them to start this conversation with you about customer success enablement?
That's a great question, Max. I think a lot of the leaders are looking for new ideas. You're absolutely correct. In a market downtime as we're having, the sales function doesn't perform as well as it normally does, right, in an improved market. So ultimately, in order to continue to show growth, top line and bottom line growth, leadership has to find ways to bring those revenue dollars in. I can't think of a better approach than leveraging the existing clients that you have, as you mentioned. And I think what founders are looking for is new ideas on how they can leverage that existing success that they have with those existing clients. We have an opportunity to come in and provide some of those ideas based on best practices we've seen across other customers.
So when we're thinking about new ideas and new initiatives, that means that we're changing how we're using those resources. And that means that some things are being taken away from those resources in terms of parts of their function. How do you see early stage founders misusing those resources? What are you stopping them from doing?
Yeah, it's great. In fact, what's usually being taken away is time. In fact, most customer success functions, I would say most of those leaders would tell you that they are already maxed out and that they can't take on any more. I would say that if you look at their workflows, their daily workflows, their hourly workflows, I'm certain that they're busy. There's no question about that. But the question is are they leveraging that time towards increasing revenue? Or are they leveraging that time for something else? Check-ins, QBRs, maintenance, chasing down product issues for a customer, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is an opportunity to, exactly as you mentioned, to retool the CS function to some degree, right? To focus a little bit more on revenue as opposed to maybe some of the other things that they're working on.
And what are they doing practically in order to focus on revenue? What are those new activities that are coming in?
Yeah, so there's quite a few things that I think the current CS functions are missing when it comes to creating new revenue for the company. Number one, the interlock between the sales function and the CS function is usually loosely coupled. The CS team has got the ear to the clients. They are the very best to take the voice of the customer in, synthesize that information, create new sales enablement so that sales knows who they need to pursue, what kind of a ideal client they should be spending the most time with. The customer success function also knows and has the ability to develop a referral program with existing clients through the help of sales and marketing. to, again, look for those tangential type business opportunities that are within the ethos of the existing client community and expand revenue through those channels. So there's a lot of opportunities that sales and success can more closely become further tightly coupled and work together. Further, at the top of the sales funnel, working with the marketing, your customer success function is there to help with defining exactly what your ICP is, so that the marketing team is going after your more target customer, as opposed to the marketing team looking more at broader swaths of the organization in which these clients sit in. So I think that those are just a few of the ideas, and there's a lot more, based on, the specific customer and their goals. But I think those are some that 9 times out of 10, usually the customer success function is not incentivized to manage some of those growth opportunities.
So when you're coming into an organization, what are you doing in like your first 30, 60, 90 days in order to orient yourself, figure out like what the burning problems are? Like what are you doing in order to build trust inside of that client?
So usually our engagements spin off from something that we've written about, that a leader has read and says, hey, you know what, we're struggling with that particular issue, or they found us because we've resolved a particular problem, maybe for one of their industry contacts that they feel like we could be of help to them as well. Usually the initial conversation starts with a problem, starts with a need. We will usually assess those needs in several conversations, and then we'll usually go in and do a discovery. That ultimately produces how the organization is structured, what the goals of the leadership team are, how are they defining their metrics, how are they defining their objectives, are there mismatches, are there communication issues, are there processes that are missing, and so once that discovery is completed, we usually come back in and say, hey, these are our findings, and we usually come up with a recipe for resolution, whether it's enabling the existing leadership through consultancy, or plugging gaps in the organization where leaders are needed, and that's oftentimes through a fractional leader that we would put in place to basically fortify that area of need until the organization can come in and rectify it long term.
An interesting word that you use is mismatch. So in my own fractional practice, I've noticed a tension in basically every single organization where I come in and the goals that I'm receiving from the executives don't line up with the reality being experienced by the staff on the ground.
Yeah. Sure.
So when you talk about that mismatch, can you dig a little bit further into that? And what are your thoughts on like the best way to resolve that tension?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So usually you can review the expected KPIs and metrics and see something is missing. And ultimately, that's one of the reasons why we're brought on board, because something is not executing as it should. There's a high churn, there's low growth, there's low retention, whatever the case is. There, net promoter scores all over the board. Whatever the quote unquote problem is, and usually that's a result of a leader that wants to do kind of a knee-jerk reaction. In fact, I'll be releasing a blog here shortly on a recent case study where a leader wanted to quickly pivot from a sales-led growth approach to a customer-led growth approach, and we wrote a little bit about that. But nonetheless, when we go in, and first and foremost, when metrics are missed, those are undeniable, right? I mean, you can't lie about a missed metric. What you can have is a lot of opinions in terms of why those metrics were missed. And we try to subdue the approach to creating additional opinions, but yet we get down to the actual data, work streams, and processes and say, hey, if these were modified or if these were changed, then we believe that we can get these metrics back up in place. And also, it's not to say that the metrics, the expectation of the metrics were not correct to begin with. I mean, we've all worked for organizations where organizations have incorporated stretch goals and then they later indoctrinate them as the expected goal to have. And sometimes those are just unrealistic, and we have to go back and say, hey, based on the organization that you have today, the growth rate that you have today, maybe a revision of your expectations based on the current market conditions or something that might be needed for, to be reviewed. And then we'll, of course, provide the data associated to that as well. So there's no one size that fits all in terms of the right solution, or no silver bullet. But I would say that, yes, when there is a mismatch, normally you can justify the area of improvement based on the data that you find.
So where do you see these early stage companies that you're working with, where do you see them going off track? Like what's painful for them? Where are they hurting?
That's a good question. I think every organization is a little different. I wouldn't necessarily say that any one of them are completely off track. Usually, if we identify a client that is completely off track, sometimes we won't even really engage the client because there are other problems, right, with that particular client that we won't be able to resolve, right? We at KD McAlly, we look at a very specific part of their business, and that is the growth and retention of existing business. It just so happens that a lot of the work that we do is within the customer success function, but also a lot of the work we do is within the sales and marketing and product function as well, because of the interlocks. I would say that today, most of our clients are looking for new ideas, new ways. How can we get more with what we have today? And how can you help us with that? I think that's what we're seeing mostly in the marketplace.
Okay. Now let's shift gears to the more fractional leaning side of the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
How long have you been? When did you found KD McAlly, and how long had you been in industry before that?
Yeah, so I started KD McAlly about 18 months ago. My professional domain experience has spanned from working for professional service organizations like Dell Services, Cognizant, Logigear, and those type companies. But my functional experience has been owning the sales and revenue responsibilities for many of these companies. And so I've always understood, the revenue and sales component. And because I've worked for professional service companies, I've also understood the labor arbitrage associated to outsource an offshore type model. So those have been areas of understanding that I've had for a really long time. With KD McAlly, I saw a need that working in the professional services space, in the digital space specifically, helping companies migrate from on-prem to cloud and from monolithic desktop applications to digital on mobile and web. And so we helped a lot of those companies, transition in their digital transformation initiatives. And in the course of that work that my teams were involved in, we would see companies that basically built a B2B SaaS environment from the ground up, incorporate a very good growth and retention function under the auspice of a customer success organization. And then we also saw companies that were still doing traditional account management, with cloud-based solutions. And there were just such a vast, disparate performance between the companies that didn't really understand growth and retention from a SaaS model from those that did. And I formed KD McAlly with the idea that I would help those that were laggards in the space, regardless of the size of the company, whether it's a small company or a massive Fortune 100 that's trying to be as nimble as a startup here in Austin. And so that was the purpose of starting KD McAlly. Now, I will say that founding the company, I didn't have the luxury just to go and onboard, tens of CROs and tens of VPs of success and so on and so forth. And so I needed a way to deliver expertise, leadership to my clients that they needed. And I knew that the marketplace had. I just didn't know quite how to create a construct that allowed me to leverage their expertise without onboarding them as a full-time employee, in which the company couldn't afford at the time of our onset. So I started the Fractional Leadership Group on LinkedIn, and it's been a huge win for me because I realized that there were so many people, leaders out there in the marketplace that either chose to go into semi-retirement or would like to, back off from an FTE role and do things more part-time, and extremely knowledgeable people and looking for new, exciting opportunities. And so it was kind of a win-win. And that's how I came to found the Fractional Leadership Group there on LinkedIn.
I have found that is one of the great things about being a fractional executive, is that you're able to deliver massive amounts of value in really a meeting or two a week, just by helping them avoid things that you've seen a dozen times before.
Yeah, totally agree.
A lot more of it is keeping them from doing things that are going to destroy tons of value.
And Max, I approached fractional leadership very selfishly in the early days, just to have something to serve KD McAlly. But I always built the community with the idea of it's not just for customer success. So we now have, it's open obviously to any C-suite type leader, all the way from a CEO to a chief people officer, even a chief legal officer, right? And then we've got Slack communities for every functional domain, whether it's CEO, COO, CRO, CCO, CGO, CISO, CPO, CLO for legal, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm certain that I'm missing a couple there. But the idea that I've later understood in working and placing some of these fractional leaders is that, for me, the company, we needed that, and other companies are going to need these fractional leaders too. And I know, Max, you're leveraging fractional leaders as well. But what's interesting is that a lot of these startups can't even really, even if they could afford it, and a lot of them just simply cannot afford the pedigree of some of these leaders. But even if they could afford it, they can't really utilize, right, the 40-hour work week of a high powered COO or a high powered CRO or even an SVP of success, right? They just can't consume the utilization of that type of leadership. And so what I've found is that even if you wanted to and could afford to place an expensive C-suite, but you don't have the organization to fully utilize, they'll become bored and they will leave the organization. And so I'm a huge believer that fractional leadership is definitely the way to go, whether you're trying to spin up and incubate a business function within a large organization or incubate a brand new business organization in its entirety.
Absolutely. Even if you're able to afford a full-time leader, often it's not the optimal way to do it. In a lot of early stage companies, they have full-time pedigreed COO or something like that. And they're having to spend half of their time, chasing down people and filling out spreadsheets and
totally agree,
filling out forms and stuff.
And I'll say this too. You're right. And I'll say this as well, that if I could get $1 for every time I said this, I would take you out to the nicest restaurant here in Austin tonight. But the CRO that takes you from a C to Series A is most likely not going to be your CRO that takes you from a Series C to D, right? And so it's really important, especially if you're a startup, as a CEO or a founder, to think about the type of leader and pedigree you need for each season of your organization. And usually they align pretty well to the series of funding in which you're in. And oftentimes, these startups will onboard a CRO in their seed round or their Series A, and then they're sitting in Series C and they're just tanking in revenue, and they have no idea why. And it's because they kept the same CRO. And I'm just picking on the CRO right now, but it goes for any other the C-suite, right? And when you are hyper scaling like you are as a startup, it's really important to make sure you've got the right leaders in place at the right time of your season.
Yeah. I think a common thing that I see is leads will come and they'll have like, maybe like $250,000, $300,000 in revenue. And at that size, it's not clear that they have a repeatable model. It's not clear that they've solved a lot of these, like core product market fit challenges.
Yeah.
I've never had somebody, enjoy the conversation where I basically tell them, you don't want a product leader right now.
Yeah.
I'll just burn a lot of money.
Yeah. You're spot on. No, you're totally right. I've told clients in the past that, you're not ready for a VP of success yet. You need a director of success. You got to build these processes up, and then once you scale, then look for that VP of success. And here are some of the things you need to look for specific to your customer. To your customer base and your organization in terms of what you need in terms of VP of success. Totally agree. You're absolutely correct.
And now you've got this larger practice. You've got a network of other fractional leaders who you're able to tap into. How do you think about the balance between client-facing work and maintenance of the practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I lead from the front. I'm in the trenches. I'm connecting with clients. I'm involved in the delivery simply because I want to continue to understand what are our clients going through and seeing if I could theme out some common understanding that I could write a blog on and help, some other companies, with some of the things that we're learning. But at the same time, you're right. I've got a business I have to scale. And I would say, I don't know what the percentage of time is, but I'd probably say I'm probably 100% of the time in the weeds with the clients, and I'm probably at 40% in with scaling the business. So I'm probably running at about 140% work rate right now. But it is a lot, but it's necessary. I think the market is changing so quickly, and I think there's such a need, especially as we started the conversation earlier on. Companies are looking for new ideas to continue their revenue path, and the existing business is where it's at right now.
And as we're looking at like the next year or so, second half of 2023, first half of 2024, where do you see things going, both for the kinds of companies that you serve, these startups, even to Fortune 100s, and also for fractionals in general?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the startup scene, and Max, as you know, you're here in Austin here with me. We know what's happening in the startup scene. We know what's happening with current valuations. We know what's happening with expansion in some of these Series A through, say, C type companies. They're still going to have needs. There's no question about that, and we'll continue to serve those needs. But I also find something rather interesting in the sense that I would say much larger, more established companies are also trying to find a way to become more nimble, like the startup companies have been, the B2B SaaS startup companies, have been in the past. And they're going to look for best practices and lessons learned and see if they can apply. In fact, we're having conversations right now with some really large cap organizations about bringing some of the best practices of customer success from the B2B SaaS world into larger organizations that are not necessarily B2B SaaS, professional service companies and things like that. So they too are in need of growth, and they too have a large existing customer base, and they too are not leveraging the existing customer success stories as well as they could. And so we're there to help.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can search for me at on LinkedIn, Clayton Simmons. KD McAlly is the company. That's KD, 2 letters like Kilo Delta, McAlly, MCALLY. It's kd-mcally.com. And then, of course, you can obviously find me on the Fractional Leadership Group there on LinkedIn. I would love to have more connections and more dialogue within that community.
Well, it was so great getting to speak with you, and thank you for coming on.
Fantastic. Great to meet you, Max, and I look forward to our continued conversations together.